who's as adamant about his or her position as I am about mine, whom you think is sharp. Seriously, we know that. And another thing, we heard him say that... Hello, I am Larry Elder, of course, and welcome to another edition of And Another Thing. I think this is like our 9th or 10th one. We shoot them every week, and we then post it every week, and that way Premium Eldorados get a special little bonus. And last week we were talking about Richard Nixon. We shot, as you recall, the show from the Richard Nixon Library. And as I was being given a tour, I learned a number of things about Richard Nixon, including a couple of myths that apparently were challenged on this tour. And one of them was that Richard Nixon had a hostile attitude and a hostile relationship toward Martin Luther King. But according to the museum guide, Martin Luther King had a better relationship with Nixon than King had with JFK, even though JFK is widely believed to be, as between Nixon and Kennedy, the more civil rights oriented of the two. But it turned out that there was a letter that I saw, a 1957 letter written on Martin Luther King stationery, signed by Martin Luther King, in which he was thanking Richard Nixon for his help in pushing forward civil rights legislation, and that he expected that Nixon was going to do the kinds of things that Martin Luther King wanted him to do. It was clear they had a very good relationship. The story I heard, I think I told you this last week, is as follows. During the 1960 presidential campaign between Richard Nixon and JFK, Martin Luther King was arrested, and his people sent identically worded letters to the Kennedy people and to the Nixon people. And Nixon did not respond, but JFK called Bobby Kennedy, who made some phone calls, called the judge who was holding MLK, and the judge released MLK. Well, my mother told me this story, and I was in church and I witnessed it myself. The pastor was talking about this letter that Nixon ignored, and like wildfire all over the country, no kidding, in churches all across the country, this story was told. And as recently as 1956, I think it was, maybe even 1956, yeah, blacks voted 39% for the Republican Party. I mean, think about that. 95% of blacks vote right now for the Democratic Party. Imagine if 39% of blacks voted for the Republican Party. Mitt Romney would have been a shoo-in. But that's how many blacks voted for the Republican Party at the time. So the Republican Party was not a party that was perceived to be a party hostile to black people. Anyway, so after this, however, about 80% or so of blacks began voting for JFK. The Republicans still got about 20-25% or so of the vote, but still most of it now suddenly started going towards the Democratic Party, even more so than the juice that FDR's policies gave the Democratic Party. Anyway, so it turns out that Richard Nixon was not hostile towards civil rights. The reason he didn't respond to this letter is because, remember, he's a member of the current administration. He's vice president. So you want him to undercut the president by picking up the phone and calling a judge and telling the judge that he should let somebody out. And Richard Nixon is a lawyer. JFK is not, but Richard Nixon was a lawyer. I don't think JFK was a lawyer. I gotta check that. But Richard Nixon was a lawyer. And Richard Nixon felt that it was inappropriate, a violation of the canons of ethics, for him to call a judge and say, please let somebody out. And again, furthermore, it was a matter of how to handle this because Richard Nixon was a member of the current administration. It's my long way of saying Nixon bad because bad treatment of MLK is a simplistic and unfair characterization of their relationship, and it cast, once again, the ugly eye of racism on the Republican Party, which is why, in my humble opinion, so many people feel this way, because the schools are government schools where all these people are very sympathetic towards big government, hostile towards the Republican Party. Nixon has this caricature image, and so it's never fleshed out. The other thing that I heard that apparently turns out not to be true is this, and my mother told me this. Law firm. Larry, I have to say that our president has a lot of passion for issues like gun control. He certainly does. I am just wondering why he does not have the same passion and vigor in seeing that myself and others get back to work with a job. Hello? Guns aren't really killing my family. The lack of a job and a prosperous economy is what has been killing my family for over the last 2 years. Pita from Akron, well, I couldn't agree with you more, obviously. That's one served right over the plate, right in my wheelhouse. Let me say this, though, about your question. The thing about gun control that baffles me is the left loves to talk about science, global warming, and that people on the right are anti-science because they don't buy the hysteria that goes along with global warming. Obama has often suggested that Republicans have their heads in the sands and they're ignoring science, ignoring evidence, ignoring logic, ignoring empirical data. I'm okay with the idea of applying empirical data to determining whether or not we have a serious problem of man-made activity contributing to climate change, and B, whether or not we should take expensive measures to do anything about it, and C, to what degree man is contributing to all of this. I'm perfectly okay to have that discussion. It's the wealthy country. We're talking about growth. And what you've done is you've frozen in place people who are already wealthy. They're going to get wealthier, but not quite as fast. And you've hurt the ones who want to get wealthy because they're the ones who need a thriving economy where rugged individualism thrives. So the ones that get hurt are the nouveau riche and the ones who are the least prepared to defend themselves, the most uneducated, the ones with least amount of experience. Those are the ones who get hired when the economy is going because people have to find anybody and everybody they can hire, and as a result, they lower their standards, and people who otherwise wouldn't be hired in a bad economy get hired. So this is what you've got, Peter. 2%, and they're happy with that. You know why? How you know they're happy with it? Obama isn't bitching about it anymore. And Harry Reid recently went on the floor of the Senate and complained because the right is bad-mouthing his term, the recovery. So not only do you have to put up with 2% GDP and 8%, near 8% unemployment, but you can't even bad-mouth it, otherwise you're a bad person. Poor Phil Mickelson. He lives out here in California. Prop 13, taxes for him go up to 13.3% just state, then goes 36 to 39 Fed, then he has a 3.8 Obama tax, and then additional Medicare tax, and then he complains about it mildly, and he's told that by his handler, I'm sure he should not complain. So then he publicly apologizes for complaining. So you can't even complain about being rooked by other people because of your hard work. You can't even complain because you're ungrateful. So talk about a win-win-win. They take your money and they make GDP unproductive and slow, and then they malign you for complaining about the results that they have achieved. Hello! These guys are just too much. Will is from Hartford, Connecticut. Now that President Obama has gone all in on using drone attacks on anyone that is an enemy of the United States without any prior approval, how come the left is cool with this? They also seem to be silent on Gitmo still being open and keeping the Patriot Act in force. Why is the left now okay with all the Bush-era policies? Can you say double standard? Don't get me started on that. They're okay with lots of Bush-era policies. Rendition. You know what rendition is? That's where you take a terrorist to another country because that country has a somewhat more genteel attitude towards torture than we do. That's a policy that was criticized by Obama when he was a senator running against John McCain. Thank you. But now all of a sudden, not only is he continuing it, he's stepping it up. And Robert Byrd, the so-called conscience of the Senate, the former member of the Klan, I digress, when George W. Bush was dropping drones on people in Pakistan, what was he saying? Drones! Barbaric! 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 Drones! Now all of a sudden, of course, he's dead. But there were many people that were also saying the same kinds of things, not only about that, but also about other enhanced interrogation techniques. Gitmo is still open. There was something called the Get Out of Iraq Now caucus. 80-some members of the House had belonged to that when George W. Bush was in office. Obama gets elected. We're still in Iraq for a number of years. We're now out, mostly, but the 80-some-odd members of the House that performed this Get Out of Iraq caucus now suddenly stopped meeting. Odd, isn't it? And I remember the term jobless recovery. I remember the Associated Press used to constantly remind us that tell your friends, go to my website, larryelder.com. Every new El Dorado gets a free copy of Michael and Me, my feature-length DVD where we explore the Second Amendment. Seriously, we go around the world. We look at Stalin. We look at Mao. We look at Idi Amin, what people like that did regarding gun control. We have lots of quotes from some of these people. We interview people like Gary Kleck, the criminologist that I mentioned. We interviewed Susanna Hupp, who had a firearm with her in her trunk of her car, unfortunately for her, when there was a shooting at a Luby's restaurant in Texas, mauled a bunch of people, and because of this, she ran for and got elected to state legislature in Texas, and one of her agendas was to pass a shall issue permit law in Texas, and she did so. And we interview her, and she talks about how, as she had her firearm, she believes. I hope you enjoyed this small excerpt. If you want to see the full video, got to be in El Dorado. Go to my website, larryelder.com, log in, fill out the form. It'll cost you about $4.75 a month, or about the price of a mocha frappuccino latte at your favorite coffee house. As you can tell, I don't like coffee. I'm a tea drinker. See you next time.